There's a story I read once about Ian Fleming, the author of the James Bond series, and he was in the hospital. I think he'd had a heart attack or something, and as he was being admitted to the hospital, the doctor told him, under no uncertain circumstances can you work on a James Bond novel while you're here. Your heart is too weak. Your condition is too precarious. Do not write. It will strain and stress you too much. And it's true, writing is a difficult thing, and thinking about a book, it just hurts your brain sometimes. So I get what his doctor was saying, but a writer can't not write. That's the condition that we have. What Ian Fleming ended up doing was he took that time and he wrote the beloved children's book and movie, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. And I just love that story, how something so great and innocent came from such a place of pain and vulnerability and being stuck, quite frankly. And it's right out of the pages of Stoicism. Marcus Aurelius says, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. He says we can accommodate and adapt, we can adjust. In one sense, 2020 was like getting hit by a truck. I couldn't speak, my books couldn't be sold in stores, my businesses were suffering. I just built an office and had employees that were supposed to come. My kids couldn't see their grandparents or their friends or couldn't go to school. It was so much that was not in our control. But what we could control is how we responded. What we could control is what we did with it. So on the one hand, 2020 was a year of me getting my ass kicked, having my plans disrupted, having everything that could go wrong, go wrong. And on the other hand, it was one of the best years of my life. And one of the reasons it was so great is because of a project I started. My son knows that I write about ancient philosophy, that I write about Stoicism. He knows some of the names of the figures. And he asked me one night, as we were getting ready for bed, to tell him the story of Marcus Aurelius. And this had been something I'd been thinking about for a long time, not just in my own writing, but a lot of people ask me, how do you teach your kids about Stoicism? And so I started to tell them a story that I called The Boy Who Would Be King. Because really that is the story of Marcus Aurelius. Marcus Aurelius was not born to a king. He was not born to any royal blood whatsoever. And yet he ended up becoming the great philosopher king of history. And he didn't do that by conquest. And he didn't do it by plotting or scheming. There's no Machiavellian way he became emperor. It's because as a young boy, and this is totally unprecedented in all of human history, Marcus Aurelius showed enough potential that the Emperor Hadrian, who was without an heir, chose him to become the emperor of most of the known world. It's a little more complicated than that. Hadrian chooses Antoninus Pius to in turn adopt Marcus Aurelius and sets in motion a succession plan that ultimately does make Marcus Aurelius the emperor. And even then, even when Marcus Aurelius is given absolute power, what does he do? He immediately gives half of it away to his stepbrother, Lucius Verus. And so as I told my son this story, it occurred to me as I told it that this is really a parable about leadership. Here is a kid who thinks he's ordinary, who doesn't know what life has in store for him. And then when life presents him an opportunity, life presents him a chance to do something great, he decides to answer that. As I said in one of the early versions, I was telling my son, the gods choose things for us. All we can choose is how we respond. And so as I told this story night after night to my son, what started to take shape was a story. And a story that I took to actually writing down. Here, I'll show you. I would write these pages in between writing sessions, and then I would come home and I would read them to my son before we went to bed at night. And we went through draft after draft after draft. It started on pages like this, and it moved to pages like this. Then it moved to just loose leaf pages like this. And you can see here, this is a draft from April. This is a draft from April 13th, so a month or so in. And just over and over again, we went over it. And so I've probably read this story now 100 times to my son, maybe 200 times. And he would give me feedback. I could see when he would get bored. I could see when he perked up. I could see when he would quote lines back to me the next day. So this is a draft from November. You can see printing it, and I'm already making changes. Then here's one from late December or mid-December, so right around Christmas. And over a year now, these drafts have accumulated. And then finally, These are my page proofs. As one day bled into the next, I'm sure you remember the endlessness of what lockdown and quarantine was like, how a thing felt like it was 3 days ago, but really it was 3 months ago, and that was it for me. But I had this thing that I could help measure my progress against, which was the book, The Boy Who Would Be King. This is the page proof of the cover. I see The Boy Who Would Be King as the memento of that experience, the connection, the extra on top, which is that my son and I got to work on a book together. And I got to answer this question that I have gotten thousands and thousands of emails about over the years, which is, how do you teach kids about Stoicism? How can you tell the story in fiction? To me, Marcus Aurelius' story is so incredible that it almost is fiction. A boy chosen to be king, the most powerful man in the world whose primary influence was the discourses of Epictetus, the wisdom of a slave was guiding the most powerful man in the world. It's unreal. And to think that Marcus did this, a chunk of it through what we now call the Antonine Plague, it was, as the Stoics say, fated. This is the first time I've ever collaborated with someone on a book like this. I got to work with Vic Juhas, whose stuff you've almost certainly seen in Rolling Stone and a bunch of other great projects. He did all the illustrations. He and I were just in a zone. His stuff perfectly captured what I was trying to do in the book. But there was another wrinkle, another sort of impediment to action advances the action moment in this project, which is I took it to my publisher, who's published 11 of my last books. They're set to publish 3 or 4 other books that I'm in the process of writing. For whatever reason, we couldn't come to an agreement. And so there was this part of me that felt maybe the book won't come to fruition. But instead I called a mentor of mine, someone who's given me a lot of great advice in my own career. And I sort of laid out the thing, and he said, this is an opportunity for you to try a project your own way. So I did the book totally myself. I funded it myself. I made all the decisions myself. I found the printer myself. I made the decision. I am the publisher of this book. And I've never done that with a creative project before. And so whether it works or it doesn't, I've already learned so much. I've grown so much. In fact, I think this is one of the best projects I've ever done. I'm so proud of it. Just to hold this in my hand is mind-blowing to me. Because I know what it represents to me and my family. But it also, I know what it means to my growth as an artist and a creative and as a business person. So The Boy Who Would Be King, it's available everywhere now. I can't wait for you to read it. You're going to love it. We even have signed copies available.